Hello, and welcome back to the Corruptive Chaos channel. I'm your host, Corbin, and today we'll be reviewing the latest DC Comics adaptation, The Batman. Terry McGinnis plays the Batman in the film The Batman. In it, he faces off against the dastardly villain, the Penguin, as played by Burgess Meredith and the ever-clever Riddler, which is once again played by Jim Carrey, after entering an interdimensional portal accidentally opened by Selina Kyle while brushing her cat. Meow. The film is a neo-noir in the same vein as the detective thrillers The Pink Panther, starring Peter Sellers as Inspector Clouseau. Mayhem ensues with plenty of bams and pows landed on enemy goons as Batman tries to stop the Penguin army from blowing up Gotham with tiny bombs strapped to their backs. Tune in next week for the end credit scene that features the Killer Croc and Clayface in what is expected to be a thrilling cliffhanger. So, going right off the bat, I should let it be known that my expectations for this film were pretty high, but did I think I was going to like it more than the Nolan Batman films? Probably not. Did I think I was going to like it more than Tim Burton's two Batman films? Of course, those have a big soft spot in my heart. Batman 1989 and Batman Returns from 1992. And of course, we've seen so many adaptations and reincarnations of the Batman character and the characters associated with him, Alfred, and all of the villains that come with the Batman character. So with this, I kind of had an oversaturation feeling going into it. But with that said, I think it should be known that I thought this was a completely fresh take on the Batman character. To a certain extent, it becomes incomparable to other Batman films or films that feature Batman. Of course, there's DC's cinematic universe, which is maybe teetering at the moment. But with this, it feels like director Matt Reeves brings so many different elements to the film. I think starting off, this feels like a 1970s detective noir type of thriller mixed with, maybe a traditional Italian gangster film from that same era of the 70s, maybe through the 90s. And in a way, all these influences that it takes, and Batman is certainly a detective in this. He's not just sitting in the Batcave and letting the technology do the work for him. He's actually in crime scenes being a detective. But I think, as I was saying, all of these influences meld together so well, both in the script and in the execution with the performances and the direction, that it creates something that is kind of timeless. Sure, the film may take place in 2022, but the technology, the clothing, the look of Gotham, it doesn't really lend itself to things being set now in the present. So I think, as I was saying, the look of Gotham, very grimy and gritty and gross. It definitely reminds me of, crime-ridden New York of the 70s and 80s. I had flashbacks of films I've seen, like Taxi Driver, of course, directed by Martin Scorsese, and The Warriors, directed by Walter Hill, which, those are sort of dystopian in a way, but they have a somewhat grounded feeling. Less so The Warriors.
Yeah, people do anything in front of a taxi driver. I mean, anything. People too cheap to rent a hotel room.
Oh, driver, hurry up, will you?
People want to embarrass you.
But at the same time, the look of Gotham is somewhat unique. It's not as expressionistic as Tim Burton's version of Gotham. It's not just basically Chicago as it was in the Christopher Nolan trilogy. And it's definitely not the campy incarnation that Joel Schumacher brought to us in the mid-90s. So that then brings me to the cast, which I thought on paper, when they were being announced, months ago, seemed, on paper anyway, pretty unorthodox. Thinking about Robert Pattinson as Batman, that seems kind of odd, but after watching this, I think he could become the definitive go-to version of Batman on the big screen in live action. Before you've had Michael Keaton, and way back in the day, you had Adam West, who, I do love camp in films and television. So, once again, big soft spot for the 1960s Batman. But, this is a complete 180 from that era. Also, you had Ben Affleck and George Clooney and Val Kilmer and Christian Bale. I mean, so many people on the big screen in live action have played Batman. And like I said before, the oversaturation eventually feels like it should kick in. But with this, I think Robert Pattinson is this dark and gritty Batman that maybe DC fans are clamoring for.
I'm vengeance. Whoa! This guy's crazy!
Funnily enough, I don't think that Robert Pattinson maybe smiles a single time throughout the film. He really brings this raw emotional feeling to his performance that makes it feel like he is just depressed, but also just determined on a mission to bring justice to Gotham and bring down these corrupt leaders and crime lords along the way. And when he's fighting just normal criminals that are on the streets, hand-to-hand combat, it just feels like he's going for it. He takes those punches pretty well. And I thought all of the action sequences done with Batman really well executed. He's not this indestructible force like in previous versions, perhaps. He is a human being. And, when we see Robert Pattinson, he is scarred. He has taken a big beating from, fighting crime on a daily basis for what is 2 years now. This isn't really an origin story to Batman. I think by this point, everyone knows the Batman origin story. There's no need to dwell on that again.
If this continues, it won't be long before you've nothing left.
I don't care what happens to me.
Additionally, I've heard some people say this, but I also agree, is that the Batman, the suit, it feels like that is the persona of this character, and that Bruce Wayne is almost the alter ego. I think we get way more screen time with Robert Pattinson actually in the Batman costume as opposed to him as Bruce Wayne, tuxedo and all. That really doesn't happen. He's mostly a shy, introverted character as Bruce Wayne and as Batman. He has social incapabilities that are very clear, and he cannot fake it as Bruce Wayne. Moving on, also, Zoe Kravitz. We have yet another incarnation of Catwoman. I'm a big fan of Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns, who, the Catwoman is taken pretty literally by Tim Burton. Her Catwoman moniker seems to come from the fact that she is a burglar. She seems to be in this for the money. She's the typical sort of anti-hero in a way that Batman isn't. Batman is doing this for good intentions. Selina Kyle, she's in it for the money. She is kind of just done with Gotham and all of the bad feelings and baggage that comes with the city.
If we don't stand up, no one will.
You got a lot of cats.
I have a thing about strays. The bat and the cat.
And the inevitable love story that happens between Batman and Catwoman, Selina Kyle. It does not feel manufactured or artificial. It just feels like these two characters kind of need each other. They're both really broken. Selina Kyle doesn't really have anyone to go to. Bruce Wayne, on the other hand, has Alfred. But that's about it, Also, I'm really glad we got so much screen time with Jeffrey Wright as Lieutenant James Gordon this time around. Usually, Gordon is kind of a side character. You think about Nolan's trilogy. I hate to compare this so much to the previous versions, but, just to sort of say that, this Gordon is kind of awkwardly and weirdly friends with Batman in a way that we haven't seen before. The bat signal is definitely Gordon's personal thing to use his extra legal powers as a vigilante.
Fear is a tool. But when that light hits the sky...
I would do say that Jeffrey Wright plays the sort of straight-laced cop really well. He is kind of charming, and it just seems like him and Batman are up against these huge forces. Gordon is up against this corrupt police department that is in with the crime lords of the city. Another problem that people usually say about superhero movies is they have too many villains. Well, I don't think that's the case at all here. Should be noted, the runtime is nearly 3 hours, and frankly, I don't think I would cut a single scene. Things could have been, chipped away at here and there, but I think the runtime, not a huge issue. There are plenty of other big blockbusters that are that long, about that long. But so the villains, you have Colin Farrell. Apparently, I wouldn't know the difference because he is unrecognizable as the Penguin. I really hope that the Batman gets some sort of recognition in award season down the line for the makeup team with their prosthetics, because Colin Farrell's fat suit as the Penguin and his facial makeup effects look fantastic.
Whoa, take it easy, sweetheart. I got you! I got you!
He is sort of this mobster boss who is the right-hand man of another villain, Carmine Falcone, played by John Turturro. And, this is another case of those two characters being like, oh, that's kind of odd casting. The first movie I think of when you mention John Turturro's name is The Big Lebowski, in a very comedic performance.
I see you roll your way into the semis. Dios mío, man. Liam and me, we're gonna fuck you up.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Otherwise, I think of Barton Fink, both done by the Coen brothers. So here, it's odd seeing that actor be so genuinely scary as this crime lord. I mean, you think about the Riddler, who is extremely creepy in this film, but it feels like Falcone has this confidence and this scariness factor that the other villains don't really have, because he knows that he is just in control of Gotham.
So he's a subterranean creature. He's been there a long time. He kind of lives a parasitic existence, and he's a predator.
Then, of course, just I mentioned, the Riddler's in this, and he is sort of the driving force of the plot. He's the one who starts off this corruption investigation by Batman, and how his father ties in with it all. He kills the mayor who is running for re-election, which just brings down a bunch of dominoes of other political figures who are, in bed with the crime lords. So that's played by Paul Dano, and he is also genuinely scary. I think this film takes a lot of nods from the Arkham games, the Arkham video games, and there's a lot of straight tonal horror in those video games that is displayed here very well. The Riddler is part Zodiac Killer and part Jigsaw from the horror Saw franchise. He makes these figures put on these awful traps, and then he's, doing the normal Riddler stuff of sending riddles and messages straight to Batman. And in a way, Batman is kind of going along with the Riddler's game. He is eventually kind of meant to be a pawn to the Riddler unknowingly. Well, the Batman kind of gets his revenge down the line. Overall, like I said, this cast just seems kind of odd on paper, but I think that uniqueness helps to make this film incomparable to previous incarnations. You have a big star at the time, a young leading man, you're like, oh, okay, they can be Batman. You have a character actor who usually plays villains. Okay, they can be the Penguin. But here, it seems like Matt Reeves and the casting director, the casting team, really did a great job of finding people who might not make sense, but he's able to direct them really well, apparently, to bring out these great, gritty performances. Moving on to the visual style of the film, I can say that this is like my favorite look of a comic book film in such a long time. The cinematographer, Greg Fraser, also from just the color grading to the noirish use of shadow and darkness. It's just really impressive what the cinematography team, lighting team is able to accomplish. And the melding of CGI effects with the actual locations is seamless. I think a lot of modern blockbusters, I think I've said in maybe previous reviews, don't have all that great visual effects. But the average moviegoer I don't think they really care about that, but I notice it, all the time, and it pulls you out of the film. It's breaking that suspension of disbelief that you're supposed to hold while being engrossed in a film. Your eyes should be glued to the screen, and hopefully you're meant to be engaged and not really realize that you're watching a film as it's unfolding. And I think the meshing of the wonderful cinematography with the effects and the physical production of it all really just made me engrossed in what I was watching. Plus, I think the visual style just lends itself to the tone and the plot that the script and the direction was calling for. This is meant to be a dark and gritty corruption story about politics and crime in Gotham City, and the lighting lends itself to that aspect. So I mentioned earlier that I think this does have a timeless quality, and I think a big part of that is, one, the production design, and two, the costume design. There seems to be this meshing of like 1930s to 50s gangster films or noir crime films in the costumes that some of the characters wear. The Penguin, that guy ain't dressing like it's 2022. He's supposed to be this kind of over the top, as much as over the top can be in this version, kind of villain who dresses extravagantly, and hopefully we'll see him with a top hat in a sequel one day. In a way, I think Matt Reeves is kind of tricking general audiences into watching this huge blockbuster art film. It just seems like a lot of the choices made are things that would happen on a smaller budgeted film, but it's able to happen here because Warner Bros. And DC gave him the reins to do probably whatever he wanted, which is great. I'm all for director and writer freedom when it comes to feature films. And Warner Bros. In the past has not been all that friendly to their directors and writing team. It's nice to see that maybe this potential Batverse, whatever it's going to be, could spawn into a really director and creator-driven franchise of spin-off series and feature films.
I'm just here to unmask the truth about this cesspool we call a city. You're part of this too.
Plus, with the CGI that I mentioned before, I think that it's used in the way that digital effects should be used, which is that it's used on aesthetic things like world building, building, streets and buildings in Gotham to just add layers and layers upon to what the city is meant to look like. And additionally, with stunts and sort of big action sequences, it makes sense where it'd just be too costly to do things in camera practically, which, I don't want to get into spoilers, but there is in the third act, and the use of visual effects is really impressive with the terror that is going on in Gotham. The story is huge. It feels big, which is odd in what is meant to be the first film to launch a franchise, but you have the Riddler going after the top officials in the city. Batman is also trying to investigate that. He's learning that his father may be involved in it somehow in the past. So the epicness kind of helps with the runtime. Big things are happening, and the 3-hour runtime makes it so that allows to sort of breathe.
Bruce Wayne.
Sorry?
I wouldn't be bothering you here, but your people keep telling me you're unavailable. You really could be doing more for this city.
One of the last things I also want to mention is Michael Giacchino's musical score. He has scored the new Spider-Man trilogy, which I did actually notice some really great musical cues in Spider-Man No Way Home, which came out just a few months ago. But here, I think he is bringing his A game. He has those strings for those really creepy moments when the Riddler is in the plot or on screen, and it just makes your skin crawl. And there's moments of romance that accentuate, the tension between Batman and Selina Kyle. Things are thrilling during the action sequences, and additionally, he keeps you engaged with the music when there isn't much dialogue during those sort of investigative detective moments where Batman and Gordon are in a crime scene going through clues and figuring things out. Overall, his music really helps to just add an emotional punch to every given scene. Also, the theme for the film is used very repetitively but remixed throughout, and usually that's kind of something that would bug me, that, you know, we're not getting a lot of new musical score, but the way that it's remixed in any given time that it happens is done really well. Plus, it's really just a great theme. Go check it out. Overall, Robert Pattinson in the Batsuit is just a force to be reckoned with. Plus, you know, I didn't really touch on the suit design, but it feels like it's meant to be made for hand-to-hand combat. It's very slick, you know, it's very thin, you know, it's bulletproof, but it's not bulky like we've seen in previous films. I think in the Schumacher movies, and even in Christopher Nolan's adaptations, the suit is very large and it doesn't lend itself to Batman being able to move fast. But here, Robert Pattinson, you know, in his fighting sequences, is just able to go for it, and I feel like the Batsuit didn't constrain him during those moments. I think the big last thing I want to mention is I'm not usually a fan of car chases. To me, a lot of times they can just be wheels spinning. I think the best car chase put to film ever is probably in The French Connection, directed by William Friedkin. You know, it's in camera, it's actually happening on real locations in streets. But here, I actually really enjoyed the chase sequence that happens between the Penguin and Batman. Plus, it allows me to mention the great new design for the Batmobile, which is reminiscent of the Nolan trilogy Batmobile, but it feels just like, you know, it kind of meshes well with Pattinson's Batsuit. Colin Farrell is kind of hamming it up in that scene in particular. So there was great stunt work there, and that was a really thrilling moment. Plus, the score, once again, really accentuates the action that is happening in that particular scene. There's many good moments in the movie, but I wanted to mention that just as a part where it goes above the fray in a usual tropish sequence that doesn't usually excite me all that much. So, in a stellar recommendation, I'm giving The Batman 5 out of 5 stars, a perfect score. As I said, I really have a love for previous Batman movies, but I think this could be the definitive version for a long time to come. I hope that Matt Reeves is still able to do whatever he wants, basically, in the future with this character and the characters that surround him. And for once, a comic book movie adaptation felt like it was actually being inspired by other cinematic things. I'm glad that it took a lot of inspiration from the Arkham video games. You know, usually we just talk about the comic books as adaptive material. I think this is in such contrast to other comic book movies that are coming out now. This is that dark and gritty vision that I think a lot of people are wanting and asking for. It should please those people who don't want to laugh every minute with gags and jokes being thrown out by people wearing ridiculous costumes. Here, everything is taken seriously, and I think the audience should buy into that. So the execution was perfect to me of the ideas that were being thrown out there, the noir ideas, the detective thriller, the big action, corruption, plot elements. It just all meshes together to create a really enjoyable viewing experience. Of course, you know, there is a cliffhanger, kind of, to set things up in the future. And I hope that those things do come to fruition.
How am I part of this? Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were. Prove